Here's another one for today. This is from CNBC. Looming evictions may soon make 28 million homeless in the U.S., experts say. The coronavirus pandemic could result in some 28 million Americans being evicted, one expert said. By comparison, 10 million people lost their homes in the Great Recession. Here's what we can expect from this crisis. Emily Benford began her career representing homeless families in Washington, D.C. Her first case involved a family that had been evicted after complaining to their landlord about holes in their roof. One of the times she met with the family, one of the children, a 4-year-old girl, asked, "Are you really going to help us?" Benford struggled how to answer. "I had met them too late. I couldn't stop the eviction. They had already been sleeping in the subway and in other people's homes, and you could see the effects it was taking on them." Today, Benford is a leading expert on evictions. She is the chair of the American Bar Association's Task Force Committee on Eviction and the co-creator of the COVID-19 Housing Policy Scorecard with the Eviction Lab at Princeton University. Throughout the public health crisis, Benford has been investigating how states are dealing with evictions and sharing what she finds in a public database. CNBC spoke with Benford about the coming eviction crisis and what can be done to turn it around. The interview has been condensed and edited for clarity. How does the eviction crisis brought on by the pandemic compare with the 2008 housing crisis? EB, we have never seen this extent of eviction in such a truncated amount of time in our history. We can expect this to increase dramatically in the coming weeks and months, especially as the limited support and intervention measures that are in place start to expire. About 10 million people over a period of years were displaced from their homes following the foreclosure crisis in 2008. We're looking at 20 million people to 28 million people in this moment between now and September facing evictions. You study the intersection of housing and wealth. What will all these evictions mean for people's health during the pandemic? Eviction negatively impacts the trajectory of an individual's life, and it can do that in a permanent way. Studies have demonstrated that eviction causes increased mortality and causes respiratory distress, which in the COVID-19 pandemic can put people in greater peril. It results in depression, suicides, and other poor health outcomes. The primary response to COVID-19 has been to shelter in place. If there's an increase in homelessness, one economist estimates homelessness could rise by more than 40% this year, that could spread the virus. You have been keeping track of what states are doing to protect tenants, mostly through eviction moratoriums. How do you feel the efforts have fallen short? Some of the moratoriums are limited to different segments of the population and in their duration. They were also not coupled with financial assistance to ensure that renters don't accrue this backed up debt and are stabilized enough to stay in their unit. Another issue is that some states' landlords were allowed to go forward with hearing on eviction and even receive an order of eviction, and it was only forestalled at the execution stage. That means that there are a number of evictions that are just waiting for sheriffs to execute. The moment the moratoriums lift, all of those families will be immediately put out. And right now, 29 states lack any state-level moratorium against evictions. Because of the pandemic, a lot of these evictions are unfolding over video or phone instead of a courtroom. What are the issues that come up here? Even prior to the pandemic, the system was very challenging for tenants to navigate and to raise their rights. 90% of tenants across the country are unrepresented. When you consider that people are now choosing between rent and food for their families, they're also unlikely to be able to pay for minutes on their phone or Wi-Fi or to log into a remote hearing. So appearance itself may be very challenging. If they fail to appear, if they weren't able to dial, or if they don't have the right link to Zoom, that's considered a failure to appear, which results in a default judgment for the property owner. What can be done to make this eviction crisis less devastating? As an immediate measure, we need a nationwide uniform moratorium on eviction, and it has to be coupled with financial assistance to ensure that the renter can stay housed without shifting the debt burden onto the property owner, which is very true. The owners that are most likely to be affected by the eviction crisis now are those who have small properties and don't have the financial cushion to make ends meet over a period of months when they're not receiving that rent. Once that's in place, we really need to start addressing the root cause of the eviction crisis and the lack of affordable housing. Yeah, this is something that it is what it is. And a lot of the owners of all these units probably can't get their rent. I'm sure there's been some that have been getting partial rents and whatever they could, but they're probably right. We have 110 million people that are basically could be put out of their homes. And like I said, these 20 to 28 million are already ready to go. So if only half of these get dumped on the street, we're going to have a crisis. Donald Trump and his administration will have to do something, because there's two things are going to happen. One, a lot more homeless, a lot more crime, a lot more everything. And two, the values on these properties will probably start to go down because nobody will be able to rent them. And the few people that are still able to rent are going to have their pick, and they can demand lower rent prices. And then without the banks giving forbearance on the loans to these small properties, so they don't have to put so much pressure on the tenants, which I do believe that's probably going to happen, that they're going to put a forbearance on the loans from the landlord. The landlord will allow the tenants to make payments to catch up with the rent, and then we'll see. And then, we'll see what happens with people in these positions. But I had said something about this earlier. Well, there's a ton more articles out there about rent and homelessness and what's going to happen. In Cali alone, man, in Los Angeles alone, there's about 300,000 people that could be dumped on the street. So just let that sink in. Trust and believe it's going to be a mess. COVID has pricked this pin we call an economy, and the balloon is slowly leaking air out. And if it goes flat, we're in trouble. But for right now, what we can do is cross our fingers and keep hope alive that COVID doesn't get worse, especially after September. And they work this stuff out between the landlords and the renters. But this is where the government steps in. But anyway, I'm going to get off here. This is BGS out, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.